questions are being asked now on Bard, as well as what this means as far as incumbents are concerned, and whether, at least as far as these large language models are concerned, the fact that it's the incumbents that are saying, let's regulate, is that self-serving, the call for regulation from the incumbents?
Definitely, there are three components to this, right? And we should recognize all of them. So the first is the level of research and the level of capital expenditure that is required for this is tremendously high. So the seminal paper about transformers came out of Google in 2017, which was Attention is All You Need. That probably was the culmination of billions of dollars of spend to be able to get to that understanding and that representation. And since then, OpenAI obviously has raised more capital, probably 10 times as much capital in the last 12 months alone, as is the entire spend of all the IITs and ISC combined in India. The budget for that is $1.2 billion, and OpenAI raised over $10 billion. So it's very capital intensive. The second is it requires very specialized skills. As Ashutosh was saying earlier, coming up with the ideas and building those models and algorithms is a very specialized skills. Applying it is a lot more general purpose skill. And the third thing is you also need to be able to deploy it at very large scale. So the incumbents have an advantage in all three of those areas. Now, the classic innovation that happens always is there's a step change in technology, and it opens up the doors and windows for newcomers to come in and take on the incumbents. And obviously, it will be in the incumbent's best interest to try and prevent that from happening.
So which is where we're probably going to see this debate on regulation play itself out. Who should regulate? What should be regulated? How much will be regulated? But speaking of regulation, Ashutosh, I want to understand from you, specifically since you're talking about skills and talent and using artificial intelligence within the HR space. In Europe, for instance, as and when the regulation does come into play, there is the requirement of a notification if you're using AI. What about the possibility of that here, and how would you deal with that?
So it's already coming in New York, although it has been getting shifted, but expectation is that in a month or two it will be live in New York. So those regulations are coming. Now, what the difference is, sometimes HR is considered to be a high risk category. Now we can debate on the risk level. The key thing is not whether it should be regulated or not, or whether AI should be used or not. AI is getting used, and that ship has sailed. So AI is going to get used. It's a competitive advantage. So you can't rewind that stuff, right? Yeah. Now saying that, we should stop the development in that, we should stop the research, I think doesn't work like that either, right? Or saying that we are going to regulate the actual algorithms makes no sense. But what you have to really think about, what is the application, how it is getting used, and focus on that stuff. So for example, in our space, right? How the data is getting generated, and what are the outcomes that enterprises are working towards, and making sure there is a full transparency around that stuff, like how it is impacting every protected class. And bringing that transparency, I think, is extremely valuable. So to me, having the right regulations will speed up the development over here. Today, there's a lot of confusion. Some people are saying, let's regulate. Some people are saying, let's not regulate. I would rather regulate, be transparent, be consistent, be clear, be concise, precise, and then so that actually the outcomes can be there, people can drive that, right?
But on this issue, and I want to get each one of you to comment on that, what should be regulated and who should design the regulation? Because one of the fears also is that because the incumbents are the ones who are sort of calling the shots, so to speak, they will also be the ones calling the shots when we talk about regulation. So who do you believe should regulate? And of course, the hope is that there will be harmonization across different regions. Otherwise, it will become even more complex.
No, great question. So when we talk about regulation, right, saying that you should use ChatGPT or you should not use ChatGPT, I think is meaningless. But in HR world, there's already a regulation. There's already EEOC and OFCCP. And EEOC requires that there has to be equal employment opportunity. You can't discriminate against anyone based on their race, religion, caste, gender, ethnicity, age. You have to make sure that everyone is getting a fair chance. And not just for hiring purposes, for promotion purposes, for internal mobility, any of those things. So those regulations are already there, irrespective of whether you are using an AI system or a human being is going through that process. And to me, that is the right way to look at this thing. So that ultimately, it's all about what outcomes you're driving, and can you be transparent about those outcomes. Saying that I'm using through AI so I should get regulated. But as a human being, I can do whatever I want. Makes no sense, right?
Yeah, no, I
so I
agree with
think
you.
having that regulation around the actual outcome business that you're driving is how it should be, in my opinion.
In light of the bets that you're willing to make, what new spaces in India would you want to consider?
So that's one. So in the US, we just helped co-create a company in the healthcare LLM space. And I believe that can be a big space in India. The second part that I believe now that the geopolitical alliances are shifting, and after COVID, we all understood that single points of failures and depending on one player in any given geography is a bad thing for everyone. Supply chain resilience has become very important, and there's a re-globalization that's happening. I think India can play a very important part, and one of our 5 pillars of our strategy is global resilience. And what does that mean for different countries around the world? And that's become a very important theme for us as we look at India.
Okay. Ashutosh, India and the relevance of India as a market for you and the company?
First of all, we do have a large presence in India, and especially with access to the talent over there, that is a big focus area to build our company, and most of the research and development is now happening in India. So that's a big focus for us. As a market, India is the future of talent. Most of the world's talent is sitting in India. But we talk a lot about how generative AI is changing a variety of things. But one of the other biggest things that it is changing is how we do our work. So the implication of that is the people who are suited for a certain job today may not be suited for the same job tomorrow.
Right.
And a different set may be suited. So you have a workforce of hundreds of millions of people in India. How do you ensure that as new technologies are coming in, you are ensuring that those people are deployed in the right roles so that they can deliver to their fullest extent? And that is the key thesis and mantra of Eightfold. So as we look into that, India is a big focus for us.
So how does one create moats in an environment like this where you've got probably the next guy who's using generative AI or some other emerging technology? I mean, the ability to create moats around each company is probably getting harder and harder, right, Deep?
It can. I have this framework, Shireen, having been at very successful companies like Google and LinkedIn, and then being in the investment world for the last 8 years, that there are 3 types of companies that get generated. 90% of the companies are faster horse companies, right? They take a given problem that is very well known and just make it a lot better. 9% of the companies are car companies, right? They see a problem which is like a transportation or a horse problem, and they build the car. 1% of companies are the spaceship companies, okay? They're like, that's also a mode of transportation, but it will open up such new vistas and such new frontiers for us that we've never seen, and it will just open up completely different worlds to us. When a step change in technology happens, that 1% can become 10%. More and more companies could be those, let's open up the new frontier companies. That creates short-term dissonance, but long-term prosperity. And it is incumbent of all of us, those of us who invest in these companies and help, nurture them and mentor them, and the founders who are building these companies to say, how do we get over the short-term dissonance and discomfort that we all have? Because, new frontiers are new frontiers.
So do you have 2 spaceship companies sitting next to you?
100%.
Yeah?
100%. In fact, here's another little known fact. I was one of the first checks in both the companies long before General Catalyst invested in that.
But Deep, speaking of writing checks and funds, what, $12 billion, 11 funds, a 12th on the anvil?
That is correct.
By when do we expect that announcement to be made? And $5 billion is
We can't really
is
talk
a rumored number.
We can't talk about new funds being created because it would be against SEC rules.
Okay, all right, but something's coming soon.
We hope so.
But Deep, you're telling people within the portfolio that move fast, but don't break things now.
That's always been the case. That's always the message we give our founders. But even if we take a step back, we really care about the purpose and mission of a company and what are the founders really about. And responsibility in their innovativeness and what they're building in the company is super important for us. So responsible innovation is a big hallmark of how we judge the idea as well as the companies, especially when we get into generative AI. And it's the first time in history that code has become probabilistic, not deterministic. So, we are not saying A plus B will always give us C. It can give us C prime, and because it's a reflection of everything that has happened in the past. this idea of responsibility becomes even more important for our founders. So if they have a strong mission and a strong sense of purpose and are intentional about the innovations they're doing, I think they will end up solving some really hard problems society faces, and we will get great companies out of them.
Well, speaking of transformational companies solving large problems and creating enduring change, which is again something that you've been talking about. You know, the use cases that we just spoke of, and two of you are two specific use cases at this point in time. We're seeing people talk about all kinds of things from a generative AI point of view, from autonomous driving to even food to agri-tech and so on and so forth. Where do you personally believe the excitement is going to be in the next few years or the next few months, since a few years is a long time in a generative AI world?
I think it is changing everything that we do, whether it is the personal assistant in office or at home, whether it is employment or any other space. But the one that I'm most eagerly waiting for is the healthcare space, because that is where the masses need help.
Yeah.
And if we can help them, everyone gets the right information, more consistency, I think it will make the world a much better place.
Absolutely, and individualization of therapy, which hopefully is going to be one of the things that we could see with this bioconvergence as well. Yes, Arvind.
Yeah, so I think I am actually really excited about just the field of technology and R&D. And I think so, like when generative AI came through, like it's actually like I feel that it's actually changing how people even build products, how people are going to write code, and that's really exciting. And this the technology today is going to like fundamentally redefine how all of us do work. And I think that's the exciting part. I think the India with its like massive young workforce, there is like as all of these professions sort of change, I think there is that real opportunity for people to sort of learn how to use these new tech and just change how they work.
Deep, Ashutosh and Arvind, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us here on this special edition of Young Turks.
Likewise, thank you for having us.
Well, we are going to take a break here on Young Turks, but don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment with the news here on CNBC TV 18. But from all of us here on the team, for now, goodbye and many thanks for watching.